The snow was thick, white, and endless around the human base. Tents stood like silent guards across the frozen land. Soldiers moved from one camp to another, boots crunching through the ice. But no one ever looked at the small cage near the supply tent. No one cared what was inside, except for one man. His name was Duran, a soldier, a tech specialist, and a man with too many questions. He saw the cage on his third day at the outpost. It was metal, cold, and barely big enough for a child. Inside it sat a girl, small and strange. Her skin was pale blue, her hair long and black. She didn't wear much, just thin cloth, wrapped like old rags. Her knees were pulled to her chest, and her big silver eyes watched everything in silence. She looked like an animal in a zoo, but worse, because animals sometimes had names, or toys, or warmth. She had none of those. A soldier passed by and threw a piece of bread into the cage. It landed in the snow, beside her bare feet. The girl looked at it, then slowly picked it up with her hands and ate it. Not like a person, not like someone with dignity, but like a thing trying not to be seen. Duran couldn't stop watching. He asked another soldier, "Who is she?" The man laughed and said, "Just some alien stray. Ignore her." But Darren couldn't. That night, he brought his own food, warm soup, soft bread, and a piece of fruit. He walked to the cage slowly. The girl tensed, her ears twitching. Yes, ears, long and sharp like a cat's. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at him. He knelt beside the cage, set the food down on the snow, and slid it inside. "No tricks," he said softly. "It's for you." She looked at the food, then at him, then back again. Very slowly, she reached out and took the bowl. Her hands were thin, small, shaking a little. She brought the bowl to her mouth and drank. Darren stayed there in silence. The wind howled around them, but the moment felt quiet, peaceful, and sad. She finished the food quickly but neatly, then placed the empty bowl on the ground. Still no words, still no sound. The next day, Darren came again, this time with a blanket, folded and warm. When he reached the cage, she was sitting the same way, waiting. He gave her more food and gently passed the blanket through the bars. She took it and hugged it close. Then she looked at him and blinked slowly. Was that her way of saying thank you? He wasn't sure, but it felt like something had changed. Later that night, inside his tent, Darren couldn't sleep. He kept seeing her face in the dark. Those eyes silver and soft, full of fear and loneliness. She was not a pet, not a creature. She was someone. On the fourth day, he asked a base officer, "Why is that girl in a cage?" The officer shrugged. "Orders from above. She's not a person. She's classified." "Classified," Darren repeated. "She eats. She looks at me. She understands. Doesn't matter," the officer replied. "She's dangerous. Bred for war, not for life. Bred for war." Those words echoed in his mind like thunder. Could it be true? Or just another excuse to treat her like trash? That evening, Darren brought more food, but something was different. When he arrived at the cage, the girl looked up and whispered a sound. It was small, almost lost in the wind. ... Lari. He blinked. "What?" She pointed to herself and said it again. "Alari." It was her name. Darren smiled gently. "Alari," he repeated. She gave a tiny nod, her fingers still holding the blanket he gave. He sat down in the snow beside the cage. The cold didn't matter. What mattered was the name. What mattered was the look in her eyes. She was not just some test subject, not just an alien. She was Alari, and for the first time, someone had listened. As night fell and snowflakes danced in the dark sky, Darren knew something deep inside him had changed. He couldn't just walk away anymore. He couldn't pretend she wasn't real. And far away, inside the base, eyes were watching. People who didn't want Alari to be seen. People who noticed Darren's visits. And soon, they would act. Snow fell again the next morning. Soft, but endless. Darren zipped up his thermal jacket and carried another warm meal With both hands, he walked with steady steps toward the cage. But when he reached the usual spot, he froze. The cage was gone. He dropped to his knees and checked the ground. The snow was fresh, but there were some teens tracks, marks, heavy boot prints, and a small piece of cloth, torn brown, the same color as Larry's blanket. His heart pounded. Where had they taken her? He stormed into the mess tent, eyes sharp. "Where is she?" he demanded. One soldier looked up lazily, chewing. "Who?" "The alien girl," Darren snapped. "The one in the cage, gone," said another. "They moved her to the lab block." "Why?" "Classified." The man smirked. "You shouldn't be asking, tech boy." Darren didn't wait for more. He dropped the tray and marched straight toward the lab facility near the ridge. It was a steel building with red lights and warning signs. He scanned his badge and entered. Inside, the air was cold, not from temperature, but from silence and wires. Rows of machines beeped softly. Behind a glass wall, he saw her. Ellery was strapped to a table, wrists bound, tiny feet locked. Thin wires ran across her head and chest. She didn't scream, didn't cry. Her eyes were open, blank, like she had shut off something inside herself. A human doctor, and two armed guards stood beside her. "She's stable," the doctor said. "Vitals low, but within limit. She looks harmless." One guard grunted, "Until she explodes." The other replied. They laughed. Darren felt a sick twist in his stomach. He tapped on the glass. Illyri's head turned slowly, painfully. When she saw him, her lips moved without sound, a whisper only he could feel. "Help." Darren stepped back, his fists clenched. He didn't know much about classified orders or alien studies, but he knew one thing: Illyri wasn't a pet, and she wasn't dangerous. She was a girl who had been treated like a beast, and now they were breaking her mind too. Back in his tent, Darren sat in silence for hours. He stared at the floor, thinking, breathing, planning. He didn't have authority, didn't have weapons, but he had heart, and sometimes that was more dangerous than guns. The next day, he tried to speak to the commander. "She's being tested," the commander said, not looking up from his files. "She gave me her name," Darren said. "She's aware, she talks, she understands." The commander frowned. "She's not human, Darren. She's not a thing either. She's not your pet." "I know," Darren said, voice firm. "She's not my pet. She's mine." The commander looked up sharply. "What did you just say?" "I mean, I'm responsible for her now," Darren added quickly. "You're hurting someone who doesn't deserve it." "She's not someone," the man snapped. "She's a tool. A failed project grown in a vat for war, not for kindness." Left the office, boiling inside. He didn't sleep that night. He kept remembering her eyes, that soft whisper help. She had trusted him, and he let her get taken, but not again. The next night, he waited until most soldiers were asleep. He put on his silent boots and took a hidden path behind the generator room. He knew the lab shift's guards changed every 4 hours. He reached the back of the lab and cut the wire lock. Inside, everything was dark except for Illyri's room. She was still strapped down, but her eyes were half closed. He rushed to her side and whispered, "I'm here." Her lips moved. A tiny smile tried to rise, but she was too weak. He pulled the cords free, broke the straps with a metal tool. Her small body fell against him, light as a feather. He picked her up gently and wrapped her in his jacket. Footsteps. The hallway door opened to guards. Flashlights. Darren slipped into a side room, heart racing. He held her close, felt her breath on his neck. "Stay with me," he whispered. "I'm not letting them take you again." One guard passed by the door. The other paused. Darren held his breath. The light moved away. He waited 5 minutes, then exited through the emergency hatch. Snow blasted his face as he stepped outside with Illyri in his arms. She trembled, but didn't cry. They made it to his tent. He placed her on his sleeping bag, covered her with 3 blankets. She was barely conscious, but she looked at him and said one word, soft like ice melting, "Mine." Darren stared at her. and for the first time, he felt something deep in his chest. Not pity, not duty, but something real. She wasn't a pet. She wasn't a project. She was Ilari, and he was hers. The morning after Duran brought Ilari to his tent, everything changed. She slept under layers of blankets, her tiny frame barely moving. Duran sat beside her, watching every breath she took. He had never felt this protective before, not even during his hardest missions. This wasn't war anymore. This was personal. He gave her warm soup. As soon as she woke, she sipped slowly, weak but alert. Her eyes followed him now, not with fear, but with trust. When she finished, she wrapped the blanket tighter around herself and whispered, "Warm." Darren smiled. "You'll stay warm now, I promise." But promises didn't matter much in places like this, because outside the tent, trouble was already coming. By mid-morning, 2 guards showed up, big men in thick snow armor, guns slung across their backs. They pulled open the tent flap without knocking. One of them stepped inside, eyes scanning. The other stayed outside, blocking the way. Darren stood quickly, his body in front of Ilari. "She's not yours," the guard growled. "You know that." "She's not a thing," Darren replied. "She has a name." "Don't care," the guard snapped. "Orders are orders. Give her up," Ilari whimpered, crawling behind Darren's legs. He could feel her shaking through the fabric of his pants. "No," Darren said, voice steady. "She's staying here, with me." The guard stepped forward. "Close, too close. You want to lose your rank over a pet," he whispered. "She's not a pet," Darren said again, louder. The second guard laughed from outside. "Let's go. He'll regret it soon enough." They turned and left, snow crunching under their boots. Darren closed the flap and turned around. Ilari was sitting on the floor, holding the blanket like a shield. Her eyes were wide, scared again. "They'll take me," she whispered. "Not while I'm breathing." Duran said, "Never again." Later that day, things got worse. When he returned from the supply tent, his own tent was torn. The corner had been slashed open. Snow now blowing in from the side. His equipment was smashed, his heater destroyed. Someone had left a message scratched into the wall with a knife. "Not yours." Ilari sat in the far corner, arms around her knees. She looked at him with big, sad eyes. "I didn't make sound," she whispered. "I hid like you said." He rushed to her and wrapped her in his arms. "I'm sorry, Ilari," he said. "This is my fault, not yours." He spent the evening fixing what he could, taping the hole, replacing the heater with a spare. He gave her his own coat to wear. She looked tiny in it, like a child trying to wear her father's clothes. That night, they sat together in silence. Darren stared into the small lantern. "I don't know how long we can stay here," he said. "But I'm not leaving you." Ilari leaned her head against his shoulder. "You care?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied, "more than you know." The next day, the commander called him in. Duran stepped into the main office, boots still wet with snow. The commander didn't look pleased. "Sit," he said. Duran remained standing. "You're being watched," the commander said. "We've had reports." "Let me guess," Darren replied. "Guards who don't like me giving soup to someone they treat like a lab rat." The commander sighed. "She's not part of your assignment. She's classified. Unstable. Dangerous. She's cold, scared, and kind," Darren said. "She doesn't deserve to be treated like a beast. This isn't a rescue mission." "Soldier," the commander snapped. "This is military ground." "Then me," Duran said. "I'm not giving her back." The commander stared. Silence filled the room. "You've got guts," he finally said, "but you'll regret it." Darren turned and walked out, without another word. The snow hit harder that evening, but inside the tent, it was warm. Ilari sat beside the small heater, wearing clean socks and holding a cup of hot broth. Her cheeks had color now, her hair brushed, her hands less shaky. "You could go," she whispered. "Be safe." "I won't," he said. "You're not a problem I want to escape from." She looked up at him, her eyes full of wonder. Then I belong to you. He paused, then knelt beside her. No, Hilary, he said gently. You don't belong to anyone. But if you want to stay with me, I will protect you. She touched his hand. Light as snow. I want to stay. That night, Darren couldn't sleep. His mind raced. He knew something bigger was happening. They weren't just angry because of orders. They were afraid of something. Hilary was more than a prisoner, more than a lab test. She was a secret, and someone was about to make sure. That secret stayed buried no matter the cost. The snowstorm hit harder that night. Wind screamed outside the tents, tearing through the base like claws. Inside Daron's tent, the lantern flickered, casting soft light on Hilary's sleeping face. She was curled up under thick blankets, her breath calm for the first time in days. Darren sat beside her, wide awake. He couldn't stop thinking. Something about all this wasn't right. Why were the guards so afraid of her? Why did the commander want her out of sight? He turned to his data tablet, hands moving quickly. He bypassed security firewalls and accessed internal files. He had done this before, quietly, cleanly, during missions where truth was hidden behind orders. When he searched Hilary's ID code, he found a file marked Level 7 Restricted Subject E12. He broke through the lock. What he saw made his blood freeze. Subject E12, genetically engineered hybrid, female type, created from stolen alien DNA. Purpose, psychological. Warfare and emotional bond disruption in enemy species. Project terminated. Subject survived termination protocol. They had made her in a lab. Not to fight with weapons, but to be a weapon. A living tool to break hearts, to look innocent, make others care, then use that care to destroy. But she wasn't doing that. She wasn't hurting anyone. She wasn't fighting. She was just surviving, scared and gentle. Whatever they made her for, it hadn't worked. She had become something else, something they didn't expect. She had become a person. Darren closed the file and looked at her. Hilary shifted in her sleep, mumbling softly. He whispered, "You're not a weapon. You're not what they say." Suddenly, a noise outside. Boots crunching snow, low voices. He moved to the tent flap and peeked through. 2 guards, the same ones from before, were walking toward his tent, but this time, they weren't empty-handed. They carried stun rifles, glowing in the dark. Darren's heart slammed in his chest. They weren't coming to talk. They were coming to take her. Or worse. He turned fast, grabbed Hilary. "Wake up," he whispered. "We have to go." She blinked, confused. "They're coming," he said, wrapping her in his coat. "No time. You trust me." She nodded quickly, still sleepy but alert. He threw a bag over his shoulder. Supplies, thermal gear, emergency kit. Then he cut through the side of the tent with his knife. Snow rushed in, cold and blinding. They slipped out the back, just as the guards reached the front. Voices shouted, lights flashed. Darren ran, boots sinking into snow, Hilary clinging to him. They reached the outer wall, a tall frozen fence. He found the old tunnel hatch behind the generator shed. Few knew it was there. He found it on his first week during repairs. He kicked the ice-covered lock until it cracked, opened the hatch, and dropped inside. Hilary followed, teeth chattering. They moved through the dark metal tunnel. Echoes of boots and voices above. "Stop them," someone shouted. From the surface, "They've taken subject E12. They reached the end of the tunnel and pushed open a second hatch. Snow blinded them again, but they were outside the base now, free but exposed. Hilary looked up at him, breath fast. "Where now?" "There's a cave system," Darren said. "I found it on patrol warm pockets, under the ice." They pushed through the storm, wind cutting like blades. Darren held her close, shielded her with his body. Each step was slow, but he didn't stop. Not once. After an hour, they found the cave, hidden behind a broken rock wall. He pulled her inside, collapsed, and kicked the snow shut behind them. Darkness surrounded them, but they were safe for now. Darren lit a small thermal lamp. The ice walls around them glowed blue. He set Hilary down, checked her temperature, gave her hot water and a protein bar. She sat, silent, staring at him. Then she whispered, "You broke rules. For me, yes," he said. "I broke them all. Why?" "Because you're worth it." Tears formed in her silver eyes. No one said that before. Daron leaned against the wall, exhausted. "I don't care what they made you for, Ellery," he said. "You're not their weapon. You're mine now." She tilted her head. "Yours," he nodded. "Not like they mean it. You're mine to protect. Mine to believe in." She smiled then, the first real smile he had ever seen from her, and something inside that cold cave felt warm. But deep inside the military base, alarms kept blaring. A command was issued. Subject E-12 must not leave this planet. A strike team was deployed, fast, armed, and without mercy. Daron had broken the rules, and now they were going to break him. The ice caves were quiet, too quiet. Only the soft drip of melted frost echoed through the tunnels. Darren and Alari sat close to a flickering thermal lamp, their breath white in the cold air. They had been hiding for 2 days now, deep under the frozen ground. Food was running low, and Darren's body ached from the long escape. Alari sat beside him, wrapped in layers of cloth and coats. Her small hands held the last piece of protein bar, but she didn't eat it. She looked at Daron, then broke it in half, and offered him a piece. He shook his head. "You eat," he whispered. "You need it more than me." She hesitated, then placed the food in his hand anyway. "We share," she said simply. Her voice was stronger now, not loud, but sure. Daron smiled weakly and took a small bite. He didn't have the heart to argue with her. Even after all she'd been through, she still cared. "I don't understand," Ellery said, breaking the silence. "They made me to hurt people, but I don't want to hurt anyone." Darren leaned against the icy wall, looking up at the frozen ceiling. "Maybe you were meant to be one thing," he said, "but you became something else." She looked down, thinking, "Is that allowed?" Darren chuckled softly. "Not in the military," he said, "but in life." "Yes." Later that day, Darren scouted the cave entrance. He moved quietly, crawling up the slope where the cave mouth opened to the surface, through a crack in the snow. He spotted movement. 3 black-armored soldiers scanned the area with thermal sensors. Their helmets glowed red, and their rifles were long and sharp. Strike team, not base guards. These ones were hunters, and they weren't here to take Eli alive. Darren slid back down, breath shaking. Alari looked up at him with wide eyes. "They're here." He nodded. "We can't leave yet," he said. "Not until nightfall." As darkness fell, Daron built a makeshift alarm trap with metal rods and wire. If the strike team entered the cave, it would rattle, just enough to give them time to run. Ila sat nearby, watching him closely. "Why do they want to kill me?" she asked. Darren paused. "Because they're afraid," he said. "Afraid of what you are. Or maybe of what you could be. But I'm not hurting anyone," she said, hugging her knees. "I know," he said softly. "That's why they can't control you." That night, Elari had a nightmare. She woke up crying, shaking, her hands glowing with a faint blue light. Darren rushed to her side and held her. She buried her face in his chest, whispering, "I don't want to go back." "You won't," he promised. "Not while I'm alive." But his strength was fading. He had a deep cut on his side from the escape, hidden under his shirt. It bled slowly, a reminder of how close they had come to being caught. By the 3rd day, the storm outside had calmed, but the soldiers were still there. Darren knew they couldn't stay hidden forever, so he started planning again. "There's a shuttle checkpoint near the ridge," he told Ellery. "If we can make it there, I have a friend. He owes me a favor, another human." He nodded. "Someone who flies under the rules, not part of the system." Ellery touched his hand. "Will he help?" Darren looked into her eyes and said, "He will, if I ask him right." That evening, the trap wires rattled. Darren jumped up, grabbing his small pulse gun. He covered Alari with a thermal blanket and pointed to the deep tunnel. Run, if I don't. Come back, he whispered. She shook her head hard. I won't leave you. You have to, he said. Please. He crept toward the noise, gun steady, heart pounding. But it was only a snow rabbit, thin and cold. Darren sighed with relief and returned to Alari. Still, it proved something: the cave was no longer safe. The next morning, before the sun rose, they left. Alari held his hand tightly as they moved. Through the snow, each step was careful, slow. The strike team had sensors everywhere. One wrong move, and they would be tracked. After 4 hours, they reached the edge of the ridge. Below them, hidden behind snow dunes, was the old smuggler's dock. A rusty transport ship sat silent on the landing pad, and standing near it was a tall man with long black hair and a scar across his jaw. Duran waved. The man turned and grinned. Well, he said, you really did it. Can you fly us out? Darren asked. The man looked at Alari, raised an eyebrow, then nodded. For you. Always. But behind them, distant humming filled the air. Alari turned, eyes wide. They're coming. Duran looked back at the snowy hills. 3 glowing drones approached. Fast strike team reinforcements. We don't have much time, he said, pulling her toward the ship. As they climbed the ramp, Ilari stopped. She looked back at the snow, then at Duran. I won't run anymore, she said. Duran stared at her. Then fight beside me, he said. She nodded, and for the first time her hands began to glow bright blue. The ramp of the old ship shook as Duran and Ilari ran inside. Behind them, the wind howled, and the sound of drones grew louder. The smuggler, known as Bran, closed the hatch and locked it fast. What did you bring me into, Duran? He said, moving toward the cockpit. Darren strapped Ilari into a seat and replied, something dangerous and something worth saving. Bran looked at the glowing blue light around Illyria's hands and gave a low whistle. You're not telling me everything, he muttered. I'm telling you enough, Darren said. We have to fly now. The engines came alive, roaring through the icy air. Snow blew across the ridge as the ship began to rise, but before they could lift fully, 3 black armored soldiers landed behind them. Strike team. Each one carried a plasma spear and a shock cannon. They're here. Ilari gasped, her voice trembling. Bran shouted from the front. We need a minute more to power up. Darren grabbed his rifle and opened the side hatch just a crack. Snow rushed in, cold and sharp. He aimed and fired, forcing the soldiers to take cover, but they were fast, trained, ruthless. One of them threw a grenade, and it bounced off the ramp, rolling inside the ship. Ilari screamed and raised her glowing hands. A blue pulse of energy surged from her palms. The grenade froze midair, then shattered like glass. Duran turned and stared at her. How did you do that? I don't know, she said, breathing hard. It just happened. One of the soldiers climbed onto the ramp, charging forward. Darren tackled him. The 2 rolling in the snow. Fists slammed, sparks flew, blood hit the ice. Darren fought with everything he had, but the soldier was bigger, stronger, enhanced. Ilari stepped out of the ship, barefoot in the snow. The other 2 soldiers turned to her, weapons raised. Subject E12, one said. Stand down, or be eliminated. Illyria's eyes glowed brighter, her hands rising slowly. I don't want to hurt anyone, she said, but I will protect him. The soldiers fired. Twin bolts of plasma rushed toward her, but her hands moved like wind, fast and smooth. A dome of blue light appeared around her. The blasts struck, the shield and vanished. Darren punched the last soldier down, panting, his lip bleeding. When he looked up, he saw Ilari, glowing like a star. The 2 attackers stood frozen, not from fear but because they couldn't move. Their bodies were wrapped in blue energy, lifted slightly off the ground. Ilari's voice shook as she said, I'm not your weapon, I'm not your test. I choose who I protect. She dropped her arms, and the soldiers fell into the snow, unconscious. Darren got up, holding his side. You're incredible, he said. Alari turned to him with tears in her eyes. I didn't know I could do that, she said. I didn't want to use it. You used it to save us, he said gently. That's the difference, Bran shouted from inside. Now or never. Let's go. They ran back inside, and the hatch sealed shut. The ship lifted, leaving the icy ridge behind. As the stars came into view, Darren sat beside Ellery. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He held her hand, still warm from the glow. I was afraid, she whispered, afraid that using my power would make me like them. It didn't, he replied. It made you more you, but peace didn't last long. A warning light flashed in the cockpit. Bran called back. We've got an incoming signal. Military cruiser fast and heavy. They don't give up, Darren muttered. They know what she can do now. Alari looked up. They'll never stop, will they? Not until they control you or destroy you, Duran said. Then we run. Darren shook his head slowly. No, he said. We find a way to fight back, to expose what they've done. Who you really are. Bran turned the ship toward a dark asteroid field. If we can make it through that, we can lose them for now, he said. Darren nodded. Then do it. The ship dived into the asteroid belt, dodging rock and ice. The military cruiser followed, but not well. 2 of its drones crashed into a floating chunk of ice. Inside the ship, Alari sat quiet, her thoughts heavy. Daron leaned close and said, They made you to break others, but you're stronger because you chose kindness. She looked at him. You didn't run from me. She whispered. No, he said, because from the moment you said your name, you were mine. And this time Laurie didn't argue. She smiled softly and held his hand tighter. The battle wasn't over, but she was no longer alone, and neither was he. The stars stretched wide and endless across the dark sky. Bran's ship flew fast through the quiet of deep space. The military cruiser had lost them in the asteroid field, at least for now, but Darren knew they weren't safe. Not yet. Not until the truth came out. He sat across from Alari in the small cabin. She held a blanket around her shoulders, eyes looking down, thoughtful and quiet. Her glow had faded, but something inside her had awakened. Not just power, but confidence, identity, purpose. I'm scared, she whispered finally. Darren leaned forward. Of what? That I'm not real, she said. That I'm just a machine. Made in a lab, not born, not natural. Daron reached across and took her hand. You're real to me, he said, more real than anyone back at that base. She blinked, her silver eyes, wet but shining. I don't want to be alone anymore. You're not, he said. You have me? Bran entered the room, holding a small tablet. Bad news, he said. They've labeled Darren a traitor, a stolen weapon? They're calling it an attack on government property. Which means, Darren asked, they'll hunt you both across the system. Bran replied, every outpost, every planet, every scanner will look for your faces. Eloise stood up, her small body straight and firm. Then we fight, she said, surprising them both. I'm not hiding anymore. Daron looked at her with pride. You don't have to, he said, but we need allies. People who believe what they've done to you. Bran scratched his chin. There's a place, he said, a neutral zone on Andara Prime. They don't care about Earth, politics or military orders. They have a station that broadcasts across 5 systems. You want to expose them, he added, looking at Daron. Daron nodded. I want the universe to see what they did to her, and to show what she chose instead. It took 3 days to reach Andara Prime, a green and gold planet wrapped in clouds and forests. The landing pad buzzed with life, humans, aliens, hybrids, traders, smugglers, all living side by side. No uniforms, no flags, just survival and freedom. Ilari stepped onto the platform, looking around with wide eyes. For the first time, no one stared at her like she was a thing. No one threw food at her feet. No one pointed weapons. They passed through the crowd until they reached the station. An old communications tower with rusted beams and blinking screens. Inside, Duran met with the hostile woman named Kess, half human, half cybernetic. I don't do military business, Kess said coldly. This isn't military, Darren said. It's truth. He told her everything about the cage, the lab, the strikes, the lies. Alari stepped forward and said quietly, My name is Alari. I was made in a lab, taught to act like an animal, told I was nothing, but someone saw me. Someone fed me, spoke to me, saved me, and Naeem, not afraid to be seen. Kess looked at her long and hard, then she nodded slowly. All right, she said, I'll broadcast your message. The next day, Ilari's story reached every corner of the neutral systems, video footage, secret files Duran had saved, and Ilari's own words went across the stars. People watched, listened, and slowly believed. Some were shocked, some were angry, some were moved to tears, but one thing was clear: Ilari was no longer a secret. Later, in a quiet garden dome, Darren and Ilari sat under the light of twin moons. She wore clean clothes, soft fabric that didn't scratch her skin. Her hair was brushed and tied back, her feet finally warm. Darren looked at her and smiled. You're free now, he said. She nodded. Yes, she said, but I don't want to walk alone. He reached out and touched her cheek. You don't have to, he whispered. You saved me too, Ilari. Her voice trembled. Do I still belong to you? Duran shook his head. No, he said. You don't belong to anyone. But if you want, I'll belong to you. She stepped closer, placed her hand on his chest. Then you're mine, she said, voice soft but sure. And I'm yours. They stood together under the stars, not soldier and weapon, not rescuer and victim, but something new, something strong. Later, when asked by a traveler, who is she to you? Duran replied with no hesitation. She's not a lab test. She's not an alien. She's not some creature I found. She's Ilari, and I claimed her as mine.